This is Conversation Balloons, a podcast of interviews with experts and friends about all things generational. I'm your host, Leah Farish. With us today is Nolan Jones, and I met him at a conference recently and was so moved by his story and inspired by him that I wanted to have him speak to my audience. And so we really want to welcome you, Nolan, and thank you for being willing to chat with us candidly about some really challenging things. You've had a difficult life, and you've made some beautiful things out of it by the grace of God.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity.
Let's talk about what life was like for you in the earliest years. What, your earliest memories, and your
So,
parents. What was that like?
so I'm a Tulsa native. I was born at Hillcrest Hospital. I was actually born at 27 weeks, which is just barely 6 months. I was born blind and deaf with double pneumonia. Mom ended up having a double blood transfusion. It was a whole big process. I was never supposed to be here. I'm not, I mean, medically, I should have never made it, but here I am. All praise be to God for that. As far as my earliest memories go, I grew up in a really dark environment. My biological father unfortunately passed away when I was about 16 months from a accidental overdose. They found him with me asleep on his chest. Rigor mortis had set in. I was screaming and couldn't move, and so my grandma had come in to check on me and my dad, and um, so that kind of put a strain on my mom and me's relationship for a while. Because she wasn't really around at the time, and so that was kind of a lot for her. She kind of held herself responsible for that and wasn't able to cope with that trauma. So it kind of turned into a, well, if your dad would have left you in your crib, if you wouldn't have been there, if this is. So we had a really difficult relationship growing up. Um, as far as the earliest memories go, I mean, it's a mixture. They're not all bad. I can genuinely say, like, I have some childhood memories that are actually quite pleasant. I would go back and forth a lot between my mom and my grandparents. Um, my mom would go out of town a lot for whatever it was she was doing, and I'd go stay with my grandparents for a little bit. And that was really the only structure I had in my life, was at my grandparents. My grandparents would drag me and my siblings to church.
Mm.
They would try to instill in us these good moral values. And truth be told, when you're a young kid and you got parents that let you do whatever you want, whenever you want, and then you got grandparents that are all, you're going to do this and you're going to do this. Yeah, you don't really listen to those grandparents. So unfortunately, I didn't take heed to a lot of those cautions and warnings. And as I got older and I started to pay more attention and I started wanting to hang out at the family house more and be around my siblings and my cousins, I started seeing a whole different side of life at a very young age. I would say I was probably 6 or 7 the first time that I watched my mom get beat. Um,
Oh,
my stepdad growing up was very abusive. They were drug dealers. They distributed methamphetamine. And so it was very common for me. I mean, cops were always at the house. People were always going to prison, in and out. It was a constant cycle. Um, and then when I was about 12, addiction entered my life. And I ended up going to jail about 6 months after I'd used drugs for the first time. And when I got out of jail, my mom was like, well, you can't stay here anymore.
mm.
And so I was 13 and I was out on the streets.
Okay,
My
okay, okay, okay. Oh, I have to process. If you can,
Yeah.
if you're willing to, could you tell me some of the feelings that a child has when he sees his mother being beaten?
So it was hard. It was really hard. Um, I didn't understand, you know. Um, I myself went through physical and sexual abuse as a child, so I had a lot of things playing into what I was seeing, a lot of things playing into these emotions, and I mean, it was very overwhelming. It was overstimulating. I remember um, one night in specific, one of my older brothers was in town. My brother got drunk for the first time and caused this huge deal. I'm talking, my mom ended up knocked out of the back of the truck that night, got her leg broke. I was about 8 or 9 at the time. And I just remember in this moment, I was so frozen because I felt so helpless. And like in my head, going to school, like, I'd see all these other kids and like their parents would come pick them up from school and I'd go over to friends' house and like they had family dinners and their parents cared and like they got help with their homework and they had nice clothes and like everything I had was a hand-me-down. I went to school with, holes in my shoes, holes in my clothes.
Mm.
I was picked on, I was bullied a lot at school because I was the poor kid. I didn't have anything. My family didn't care. I couldn't grasp like why my life was like this and was this what love was supposed to look like? Why is everybody else's family function like this, but mine's like this? Why don't my siblings live with me? But all these people, their whole
Mm.
families live together. So it was a lot of confusion,
Hmm.
a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. That's kind of why whenever I started using, I never stopped because it was easier to just go numb and not have to feel all of this stuff anymore. It was easier to just walk through life and just put on this mask that said, "Hey, I'm big, strong, and I'm bad, and like you don't want to mess with me." And I can honestly say, since finding sobriety, my biggest struggle has been emotion because I went almost 13 years not feeling anything.
Right.
I had to experience the birth of my first child and I got married and like it sucks having to admit that like I didn't love them. I was incapable of love. The only thing in my life that I could say at that point that I had ever truly loved was meth because there was nothing I was not willing to sacrifice or give up to get that next fix.
Okay. Um, I want to go back to these childhood years a little bit more. So you just had multiple traumas, and so you're saying one thing was that you shut down your emotions, and then of course with drugs they kind of short circuit emotions so that you don't feel them. You couldn't afford to let yourself feel those feelings. Um, when you were with your grandparents, oh, did they ever talk to you about your parents? Was there ever any interpretation or kind of explanation from them to you about what was going on?
So growing up, my dad was not talked about. Matter of fact, for the longest time, my stepfather I believed was my real dad.
Okay.
Um, it was I don't really understand why nobody talked about him when I was growing up. From what I've heard and what I've learned as I've gotten older, my dad was a really awesome guy. He'd give you the shirt off his back. He was hard work and he was diligent. And everybody always tells me that he loved me more than anything in this world. He'd
Oh,
sleep in the floor next to my crib at night just to make sure I was okay. If he didn't have me on his chest, like he loved me, he loved my mom. It sucks that I don't know very much about him. I mean, I have 4 pictures of this man in my possession, and that's the most that I've ever had of this man. I don't know anything about him really, other than I look exactly like him. My grandparents that I would stay with were my dad's parents, and so they really didn't like my mom. They blamed my mom for my father's passing and held her personally responsible for that. So when I was there, they they told me that like I could always stay there as long as I wanted. I could go back to my mom's whenever I was ready. But while I was there, they would always just talk so poorly about her.
mm.
They didn't approve of her lifestyle. They didn't approve of, the activities she was involved with. And so it was always this really just negative. derogative, tear down. And so I kind of started to resent them. And so, excuse me, the older I got, the less I wanted to be there. I didn't want to be around them. Not that I didn't love them, but in my head, in my mind, like, you people go to church 3 times a week, and y'all are sitting here judging my mom.
Hmm.
And it kind of started leading into some church hurt that I developed as an adolescent.
Hmm. So you didn't want to go after a while. And,
So,
uh,
I mean, I'd always want to go to church camp, you know.
oh,
I'd want to go to the cool youth expos and do the cool stuff. But it was really hard for me to grasp this concept that there was this almighty being up above that just loved me so much and wanted, my life to be this beautiful thing. But I'm growing up in a house full of abuse, neglectful parents, no love. And so I really started to resent the church, and I started growing bitter towards God. And eventually I reached a point where I was like, you know what? I'm the God of my own life.
hmm.
There's no mighty being guiding my footsteps. I do what I want to do. And so I kind of renounced my faith for a long time and just kind of lived my life how I wanted to. And
Hmm.
my only real determination was just to be better than my mom. That's all I wanted to do.
I want to ask this about school too. I want to talk about school a little bit. But what do you think church could have done in your life? Um, what can church people do to even recognize that there's a child among them who is abused and who is addicted? Um, how did
So
they miss that? And they missed a real opportunity to
so I
minister.
won't I won't say that it was totally missed. I had a youth pastor while I was in high school. I would go out to this church sometimes. I mean, if we're being honest, I went out there because they had pretty girls in their
Sure.
congregation. He had known me for a long time, and he was more of a friend to me than he was a youth pastor. But he tried to take me under his wing. He tried to be a role model and a mentor to me. And at the time, I was kind of dealing with so much chaos in my own life that I didn't want to deal with it. I had just lost my oldest, or I'd lost my middle oldest brother. I'm weird about death. I don't like sympathy. I don't want you to hug me. I don't want you to come tell me that everything's going to be okay, because look, it's life. People die every day, and it's just how it is. And so he was trying to be that sympathetic, compassionate, loving, and like, to me that was so alien and so foreign. Had I listened, I do think that the church would have had a huge positive impact on me as an adolescent. I think I would have, found a safe space to be able to talk about what I went through. Um, I think I would have had a little bit better of an understanding that, you know, everything I went through as a child wasn't my fault. What I ended up being responsible for was accepting that as part of my story and asking God to help me heal from that. And I think if I would have grasped that at a younger age, um, and had that understanding back then, I think I would have done a lot better in school than I did. I mean, I was a good athlete, but that was about as good as it got. My grades were never good. I barely graduated high school. My senior year, I went to school 3 months, and then it was suspension and being locked up. I didn't have someone telling me to do homework when I got home, if there was anybody home at all. I didn't have somebody come to student, teacher meetings to make sure that I was doing what I needed to. Um, Most of the time I was enrolling myself in school, so I was kind of set up on self-support. I could check myself in and out, leave whenever I wanted, and as soon as that happened, I think I'd go to school maybe twice a week.
Uh-huh. And what was it like when you were there, when you were sitting in class? Were there ever teachers that really saw you, that intrigued you, or that
So,
gave you something nourishing in terms of your brain?
so yes and no. I went through a period in high school is really where like things really got bad for me. Up until high school, like I managed to skate through and didn't really have any problems. My freshman year, though, the school found out I was sleeping at the park. I didn't have anywhere to live. I was homeless. A kid had complained in one of my classes about the way I smelled, and turned into a big ordeal. But like the school didn't really give me the support that I felt like I needed either, because like, yeah, they helped me get set up with a counselor, but like I need somewhere to live. I need basic necessities. I need things that children need to grow up healthily. And I was out here fending for myself. So I didn't necessarily feel like school supported me. But I did have some teachers that still to this day, like, I'm so grateful for them, because I know that I wouldn't have graduated without them. Had they not gone to bat for me, like I would have never gotten to walk that stage. I would have, and I mean, I'm the first one in, like, out of my immediate family, I'm the first one to graduate high school. So like it was a big deal for me, and I almost threw it away. And
Oh,
if it hadn't been for, it was my cross country coach, my wrestling coach, and my Photoshop teacher. And when I say, like, I had disappointed everybody my senior year. Like, I quit doing sports altogether. I was strung out on heroin, and it was 3 months into my senior year, and I got caught with drugs at school and got suspended. And like, I was this kid that everybody was sure was going places. Everybody thought I was going to do something, because at school I always played it off that, like, nobody knew I was a drug dealer. Nobody knew I was an addict. Like, people could tell that, like, some days there was some stuff going on with me, but I'd always play it off as, oh, I'm just having bad mental health day. I never wanted to let anybody in, because in my experience, love was conditional. And so I having these real bad abandonment issues. As soon as I did something they didn't like, they were going to walk. So I kept my walls up really, really thick. But those few teachers managed to catch me in vulnerable positions a couple times. And there were some tears that were shared, and some heartfelt moments, and some memories that I'm going to carry with me for the rest of my life.
oh. Well, I'm glad there were some that touched your heart, kept you from completely despairing. So we got to kind of a point in your narrative where you were maybe middle school age. You became addicted around then. Is that right? To meth? Did you say? What
Yeah.
was?
When I was younger, it was more like, look, I would do anything anybody would give me. I didn't care if it was meth. I didn't care if it was smoking weed. I didn't care if it was alcohol. And by the time I was in middle school, our bus stop, like, we got picked up in front of a strip club that on Wednesdays got alcohol deliveries. And they would just set all these bottles by the back door. So we'd go back there and fill our backpacks up with liquor and go to school.
Wow.
Like, all the older kids were did it, doing it. In my mind, like, hey, I'm fitting in. I feel like I finally got some friends. Like, I'm cool because I carry liquor with me, and that was just, it was life. And I mean, for the longest time, like, I thought it was normal. Like, I thought everything that I had gone through up until this point was absolutely normal. I thought everybody went to jail. I thought everybody's parents, had fights and this and that. As I got older, I started losing my brothers. My brothers started passing away. I'm the youngest out of four. I'm the only one that's left.
Oh,
And so as I got older, the harder drugs became the only thing that really, you know, put an end to that pain that I was feeling, because growing up without my dad was hard enough. Like, I never had a positive role model. Every skill that I've learned, I've either learned, from my mom, YouTube videos, or I've had to figure it out on my own. And like, my brothers, like, they weren't always around. My oldest brother was in and out of prison. My middle oldest brother lived in Missouri with his dad, and then my youngest oldest brother lived in Alaska with his mom. And so we wouldn't see each other all the time. But when we would see each other, like, my brothers could tell. Like, they always knew what I was going through. They knew that I was messed up. And I mean, really, that's what it was. I was a messed up kid. I was exposed to things that no child should have ever been exposed to, and I had a lot of problems. And my brothers, they would always, like, when other people were around, don't get me wrong, they treated me like the little brother. I got the brunt of it, and they were not nice. But whenever it was just us, I it was like I felt seen. for a
Hmm.
brief moment
Uh,
because they would listen to my problems. You know, I remember the last time I saw my middle oldest brother, like I was getting bullied really bad at school. Like I'm getting my butt kicked every day. And like my brother had enough. And he's like, I'm not gonna go take care of this for you. But he dragged me out in the front yard and we didn't go in the house until he was sufficed that I knew how to fight.
hmm.
Like they didn't always use the best methods, but like I knew that my brothers cared about me. I'd always looked up to them in the sense of like I want to be like them. My middle oldest brother was probably Brady was probably he was the one that was going to go places in my mind. Like he was planning on joining the Marines and he was doing great and he got in this horrible car accident and was taken too soon.
Oh,
And after he died, I mean, that's kind of when things just really got bad for me. He was my mom's other son, and so when he died, my mom started hitting the bottle really hard, and it turned into this. Well, my kids are dead, and my reason to live is dead, and it's like, do you not even see that I'm right here?
oh,
And I mean, it was like that for a long time. After he died, it was about 6 years before I saw my mom again, and during that time, like I didn't care. I was so just hurt by my mom that I told everybody she was dead. I told everybody I was this orphan kid. My mom was gone because I didn't know where she was. So it was easier to just not acknowledge her whatsoever than to, have to tell people, oh yeah, my mom, she don't care where I'm at. She don't care what I'm doing.
oh, oh. Well, you mentioned you were living in a park. Where were you living during middle school and then high school?
So I bounced around a whole bunch. It was the summer break between sixth and seventh grade that I got arrested for the first time. And then I got out and was on the streets. So I stayed with my grandparents again for a little bit. And then by this time, my grandma died and my grandpa had slipped into addiction himself. And he got remarried. And the lady he remarried, we butted heads real bad. She'd want to wear my grandma's clothes and wear my grandma's jewelry. And like that it was disrespectful to me. And she would get a little aggressive with me. And so eventually I was like, I'll just deal with the streets over this. Like, I get this enough at home. Like, I'm not coming here to get this too.
Oh, oh,
Um, and so started bouncing around, staying with friends, aunts, uncles, cousins. And then freshman year, there was about 3 weeks where I hadn't found anywhere to stay. And so I was sleeping at Page Park in Sand Springs because it was close to the ninth grade center. And I didn't have to worry about, having to get all the way across town to get to school because I went to school in Sand Springs, but I lived in West Tulsa. And so for those couple weeks that I was kind of down and out, I was just staying there because that's where I'd been staying anyways. All my friends lived in Sand Springs.
where
And so,
where in the park would you stay?
so at Page Park, it's like one of them orange tunnels, the plastic tunnels that little kids will crawl through. I'd sleep in that.
Okay, on the playground area in the.
Yes.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
And so, like I said, another student complained I'd smelled really bad, and I mean, I hadn't showered in probably days. I couldn't tell you the last time I had a chance to do laundry, and I get it. I'm a sweaty teenager going through puberty. I stink. I get it, but in my head, I'm like, did you really have to make a big deal about it? Uh, and so at that point, like, I don't know. I was expecting to get picked up by put in the system or something, and instead, like they got me this counselor, and then I went and got emancipated, and then I was just on my own, and everybody was like, figure it out.
Wow, you got emancipated at what age?
I was 14.
14. Oh my goodness. Oh. So they didn't know where your mother was either.
No,
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
I've since learned at the time. Um, so during the 6 years that me and my mom didn't speak, I found out that my mom had gotten sick and had had some heart attacks and some strokes. And so, like, during the time that I wasn't seeing her, she was, developing the illness that eventually brought us back together. Um, I don't know where all she lived. She's told me she spent 10 years homeless. I don't know what that looked like. I know she's endured a lot of trauma. My mom's a very small, frail, fragile woman, and uh, I mean, she's a trooper. I'll give her that. But when I did finally see her again, like, didn't look anything like the mom I remembered when I was younger.
Oh, now when you were sleeping rough, when you were on the streets with no place to go, was it scary for you?
At first, yeah. Being a young kid on the streets, like nobody really wants to be in that situation. It's scary, the
Did
fear
you see
getting
did you see violence?
so not really. I'd crash at cousin's house or friend's house, like I had said, and so really, like when I would end up outside, like I didn't go towards downtown. I stayed towards Sand Springs. This little town where they're like you won't see very many homeless people in Sand Springs. Everybody comes to Tulsa because Tulsa's where the services are at. So I think I was spared from a lot of that aspect. Um, I mean, I definitely had a couple encounters where, run into somebody who thinks they're bigger and badder than you and, have to hold my own. But I mean, I wouldn't say really any extreme violence until I got a little older. Um,
And what did you eat? How did you live
so
outside of school lunches?
I stole a lot, stole a whole lot. Eventually, I started drug dealing. I was like, I've seen it done my whole life, so like, I figured I could do it. And once that started, I wasn't really hurting for money anymore. So I would just go eat wherever I wanted. Eventually, I got an apartment. And when I got my apartment, I mean, I'd cook at home or I had a part time job for a little while working at a restaurant and I would, you know, be a closer. And so at the end of the night, anything that was left over, even though I wasn't supposed to bring it home, it'd go home with me.
Hmm. Um, Before you started dealing, how did you get money for drugs?
So I can honestly say, like, I really never had to pay for drugs.
Hmm.
Um, my family was kind of well known for what they did, um, especially my stepdad's side of the family. And so, like my cousin, who was like my best friend, I mean, it was as simple as I could call him and be like, "Hey, bro, I'm down and out right now. Can you pull up and bring me a sack?" And 30 minutes later, he'd be out front with a sack. And so it was at the time I thought it was, bros looking out for bros.
Yeah. So it was just available around the house,
Yeah.
basically, or else a relative's house.
I mean, look, growing up with my mom's, like seeing rigs, dope bongs, dope pipes, baggies, scales, like that was normal. It's an everyday event. Utilities hooked up illegal, that was normal. I used to swear the house I grew up in, the only insulation in that entire house was compressed cockroaches and Dollar General grocery bags.
Oh, Nolan. Wow. Um, so once you graduated from high
Yes.
school, you managed to graduate. That's an impressive achievement.
Yes.
Um, what happened after high school?
I died. Quite literally, I died.
Oh my.
Um,
We are going to call an audible and split this into two sessions because there is so much to hear and ponder in what Nolan is saying. So please join us to hear how his story works out. It is a marvelous J curve of a life unlike most of us have experienced. So I think you'll get a lot out of it. So do come back. Subscribe and review Conversation Balloons on your favorite podcast platform. Find me at leahfarish.com and on Instagram at LeahFarish.